Welcome to Standing Firm, a Come Follow Me podcast. Here are your hosts, Jordan and Louis Onga.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Standing Firm, a Come Follow Me podcast where we talk Come Follow Me scriptures with you each and every week. My name is Louis, joined remote this week by my brother and my co-host, Jordan. And Jordan, what's going on, bro?
Not too much, man. I am just blown away that we're finishing up Helaman this week.
Yeah, I know. It's crazy.
Isn't that nuts?
Yeah. I mean, that just went by so fast compared to Alma.
I know. Alma there was some good stuff in there, but boy, that was some long stuff, man.
Yeah, it takes some time to get through it, but Helaman's really cool. There's some great stories in there, and this week is no exception. Chapters 13 through 16 discuss the prophecies and the story of Samuel the Lamanite. It's crazy to think that this part was almost not in the Book of Mormon. Had the Savior not been standing amongst the Nephites saying, hey, do you remember that part that I wanted in here? Yeah, you should go ahead and add it. But we start off this week in chapter 13 where we're introduced to Samuel, and Jordan going to start us off.
Yeah, man. You know, when I think of the story of Samuel the Lamanite, I actually think of Dad. Louis, you're older. You probably have a better memory of this than I do, but do you remember in the old Kachina ward, there was like a skit or something that was happening and Dad was casted as the part of Samuel the Lamanite?
Dude, you know what? I totally forgot about that. But yeah, I remember this.
You know what's so funny about that is for years, whenever I would think of Samuel the Lamanite, I thought about Dad, you know, wearing the bathrobe and like his necktie on his head, doing the skit. So that's really, I mean, Samuel the Lamanite is one of my favorite characters. It stands out in my mind because of the moment of, you know, Dad standing up and doing his thing and working the crowd.
Dude, core memory unlocked. Yeah, totally forgot about that. Yeah,
but the story of Samuel the Lamanite, as I've read through it throughout the years and studied this, his ability to stand in unholy and unsafe places and trust that the Lord would not let him get hurt. Our full-time missionaries go out each and every day and they visit those in need. They teach the word of Christ. Often this requires them to stand in unsafe places. Many parents today are scared to send their children to attend school, to be in locker rooms, to be sent out into the world that's stained with unholiness and scary locations. But I think that we can learn a lot from Samuel the Lamanite here, that with the Lord's help and according to his own will, no arrows that Satan or his minions have can hit them. We must develop and have the faith and trust that Samuel had here to stand in an unsafe and unfamiliar place and be negative free in our mindsets, only focused on the goodness of God. Though others still have their agencies, just like the story goes that we'll get into, arrows were shot at him. The Lord protected him, and the same protection is offered to us in these last days. So definitely excited to jump in to learn about Samuel the Lamanite this week. Really neat things, but I just hope that everybody, while you're reading and studying this week, please think of our Dad with a necktie around his head and bathrobe.
It's a little bit different version of Samuel the Lamanite story that, you know, not exactly the quality of the Book of Mormon videos, but close. That's a great way to start us off today, Jordan. Verse 4 in chapter 13 reminded me of one of my favorite verses in Doctrine and Covenants, which is D&C section 100, verses 5 and 6, which reads, Therefore, verily I say unto you, lift up your voices unto this people, speak the thoughts that I shall put into your hearts, and you shall not be confounded before men. For it shall be given you in the very hour, yea, in the very moment, what you should say. If you were to read that without knowing it was in Doctrine and Covenants, you might think that it was about Samuel the Lamanite and his story. Despite the fact that this counsel was given a couple thousand years after Samuel, this promise from the Lord was definitely available to Samuel, and he most assuredly used it. This is verse 4 from Helaman 13. Quote, "And it came to pass that they would not suffer that he should enter into the city. Therefore he went and got upon the wall thereof, and stretched forth his hand, and cried with a loud voice, and prophesied unto the people whatsoever things the Lord put into his heart." I'll tell you, Jordan, I know from sacred experience that this is true. I've felt this before myself, and I've seen this before in others. When the Spirit is present and it prompts you to speak words, whether it's in a priesthood blessing or a testimony from the pulpit or setting apart or just sitting in counsel with someone, feelings of love flood your heart for that person. And you know that those feelings are not from you, if that makes sense. And then words follow, and they are words that are not your words. I believe that this is the way the Lord sometimes speaks to us. Jordan, I'm sure you've had that experience as a missionary, and it speaks to this exact promise from verse 4.
Oh, yeah. Definitely felt that so many times on my mission throughout my whole life. And I think that the church definitely would have been ruined by now if the Lord didn't take over from time to time.
Yeah,
for sure.
no doubt.
Love that, Louis. What a great tribute to Samuel Lamanite. And just the faith to open your mouth and just knowing that God will take over. Definitely love that. Jumping to chapter 14, a quick note that always meant a lot to me is just the check-ins of the timelines. Louis, I have a friend of mine that's in the same program as me at school, and we often talk about the Book of Mormon. And it hit her this week, as she's been following along with us and learning much this year, that the New Testament has not even happened yet. And she's so right. So as much as we have studied so far, all of the names, all of the battles, all of the places that we searched for this year in the scriptures and in our studies, we are still 5 years away from the birth of Christ. And as we've mentioned before in the Book of Mormon, it starts out around the book of Jeremiah in the Old Testament. And as events and stories have unfolded in the remaining record of the Old Testament, all that we have learned in the Book of Mormon has also been going on. So we can see again, the Book of Mormon is in no way taking away from or replacing the Holy Scriptures in the Holy Bible, but it is the finished truth of these stories of old leading up to the promised Messiah's birth. 2 records on 2 different continents, really in 2 different worlds, all confirming the very truth and the matchless life of Christ. So something important I wanted to point out, and thank you, Reverend Carter, for your words this week. I always enjoy when our paths cross and our common faith that her and I share in Jesus the Christ. So a shout out to a dear friend and a sister in the light, Sister Reverend Carter. We would love to have you on the show sometime. So,
Absolutely. That would be wonderful.
staying in the same chapter in 14, I absolutely love this verse. Samuel the Lamanite, still boldly proclaiming the Lord's message, shares one of my favorite scriptures. I love this verse because this is word for word our message that we share to the world today. Verse 12, "And also that ye may know of the coming of Jesus Christ, the Son of God, the Father of heaven and earth, the creator of all things from the beginning, that ye may know of the signs of his coming, to the intent that ye might believe in his name." I love this verse because it's still true and applicable to us today. Christ will come. He will reign as King of Kings. Every knee will bend, and tongue will confess that he is the Christ, the Almighty Son of the Father, who did his Father's will and not his. This is the message that we prep each other in our churches through acts of ministry. And we also share with others who are not of our belief, that we know of the coming of Christ again to this world. So just as Samuel the Lamanite shared this exact phrase, know that it's still backed up today. Word for word, the same thing many centuries later, it's still the same message. We know of the coming of Christ.
Still the same, brother. That's great. What an amazing verse. Samuel, in addition to his marvelous prophecies concerning Jesus Christ that Jordan talked about, continues in chapter 15 preaching to the apostate Nephites. In verse 5, he mentions 3 words. And if you gloss over this verse quickly, you may think that he's simply using 3 words to describe the same thing. Verse 5 says, quote, "And I would that ye should behold that the more part of them are in the path of their duty, and they do walk circumspectly before God, and they do observe to keep his commandments and his statutes and his judgments according to the law of Moses." Commandments, statutes, and judgments. Taking time to study and ponder those 3 words, you quickly realize that he's talking about 3 distinct concepts here, and they all deal with slightly different things. If you're religious at all, you believe that God has given commandments. As members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, we follow many commandments that God has given us over the ages, and commandments deal with our personal conduct and more importantly, our commitment to obey God in certain things just because we love him. And there are not many tokens of love that we could offer God that are more meaningful to him than to use the agency that he has given us to obey him just because he asked us to. The second word is statutes. Now, anciently, statutes dealt with the law of Moses and the sometimes, being careful not to be offensive to anyone, but quirky rules that people followed. Today, it's the rules and protocols and policies that govern the body of the church. Some of them are equally as quirky. These statutes many times are heavily influenced by the culture of the times, just like they were primitively with the law of Moses. When you think of it, it's really a marvel, if not a miracle, that we as a church have achieved the level of consistency and conformity that we have. Part of that is our commitment to follow the handbook of the church. It doesn't mean that we're perfect across the board, but I think that the church is full of women and men that delight in staying in, as Samuel calls it in verse 5, the path of their duty and walking circumspectly before God. The final piece is judgment. And as people of faith, we accept the judgments of God if we do not follow his commandments or his statutes. So this is such a great verse, and you could really break it down all day long. But the main thing to know is that the prophet of God here acknowledging the difference between the 3.
Love that, man. And yet again, it's the importance of a prophet being able to break that down. So as Nephi continues to teach the word of God here, the Nephites are starting to talk to each other. And something very interesting is starting to be discussed here in verse 18. They state among themselves, "Why won't Christ show himself unto us as well as unto those in Jerusalem?" A few decades later, after this thought was shared on the American continent by the Nephites, Christ shares in John chapter 10, verse 16, very famous verse, "Other sheep I have, which are not of this fold, them also I must bring, and they shall hear my voice, and there shall be one fold and one shepherd." You can see everything starting to tie together here. The stage is being set. Goosebumps have been present as I've been studying this week. Here is where the connection starts to reconnect between these 2 records and between these 2 great nations of people. Here is where the main character, the promised superhero, the star attraction, comes into play. The 2 records soon connect. And in this record, it's almost time for the Good Shepherd to tie all this together. So this was a thought that kind of led me down a rabbit hole, but it's ending in the words of John Atkin, who's the lead commentator for the UFC. In his words, "Here we go." That's what comes to mind this week.
Here we go. I love it. Finishing up our thoughts this week, I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the redemption of the Lamanites mentioned by Samuel in chapter 15. Whenever I read verses 16 and 17 of Helaman 15, I always think of the prayer of Enos. And I loved that when I looked in the footnote in verse 16, there it was, Enos 1:13, which reads, quote, "And now behold, this was the desire which I desired of him, that if it should so be that my people the Nephites should fall into transgression and by any means be destroyed, and the Lamanites should not be destroyed, that the Lord God would preserve a record of my people, the Nephites, even if it so be by the power of his holy arm, that it might be brought forth at some future day, unto the Lamanites, that perhaps they might be brought unto salvation. This was a prayer from Enos, but also a hint at a prophecy that was given by Nephi that we discussed recently. This same prophecy was given by Alma, that the seed of the Nephites would be utterly destroyed. But I love the prayer of Enos as he expresses concern and love for his brethren, the Lamanites. Samuel, for his part, not only repeats the prophecy concerning the destruction of the Nephites, but he also expresses the mercy that the Lord would show the scattered Lamanites here in the last days. In verse 16, quote, "Therefore saith the Lord, I will not utterly destroy them, but I will cause that in the day of my wisdom they shall return again unto me, saith the Lord." When it comes to the Lord's promise of gathering Israel, I don't know if he needs our help, but I think he would like our help, and he's certainly commissioned us to help. Here in Phoenix, we are fans of a terrific basketball player named Devin Booker. Over the years, Devin Booker hasn't necessarily endeared himself to fans around the league, but I think during the Olympic Games, Devin Booker gained himself a lot of fans.
Oh, yeah.
And it started with a post on social media a couple years ago. There was another NBA player that expressed concern about the makeup of Team USA, basically saying that there are too many scorers, too many number one options. And he said, who's going to play defense? Who's going to abandon their role as a top scorer in favor of doing the dirty work on the floor? And Devin Booker responded and now famously said, "I'll do it." I think there were some eyes rolling and a lot of people saying, "Yeah, right. You're Devin Booker. You're not going to give up the glory of being a top scorer in favor of doing all the gritty work and playing defense." But then the funniest thing happened. The Olympics started and Devin Booker, true to his word, went out there and played defense and facilitated and popped off screens and shot effectively and did all the little things, all the work. He delivered on exactly what he said he would do. And Team USA won the gold medal. And Devin Booker was a favorite player of the entire coaching staff because of the way that he changed and adapted to his role. Jordan, a couple of weeks ago, during our discussion of the 2000 Stripling Warriors, you mentioned that today's youth are the best option the Lord has, and you're totally right. In fact, I believe that we've all been reserved to live during this time on the earth for specific reasons. The Lord, through his prophets, has asked us to do the work of gathering Israel. And on behalf of all of us, I answer for each of us, I'll do it. For that to be anything more than an empty phrase, we must actually do the work. Sometimes that work isn't always glamorous. Sometimes it's gritty and it doesn't fit into our daily lives. But it is our willingness to do it that counts the most. An update on the tier jar today. $20 more. How ridiculous. $20 more added to the tier jar today.
You know what's funny about the tier jar is we haven't even got to 3 Nephi 11 yet.
Ridiculous. Anyway, $475. I think that's where we're at. So
Yeah.
Getting close to $500 here. $475 in the tier jar for church humanitarian aid. That's it for us this week. Thank you so much for joining us. As we've said many times, we love to hear your thoughts, and we'd love to hear your thoughts on these chapters. Finishing up the book of Helaman 13 through 16. That's all for us this week. For Jordan, I'm Lou. Until next week, tu'uma'u, stand firm, and we will talk to you in a week.
Standing Firm, a Come Follow Me podcast, is a production of Sierra House Publishing, LLC. The show, or any opinions expressed therein, are not affiliated with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. For a transcript of today's show, please visit our website at standingfirmpodcast.com.